Hello and welcome back to the Ain't Dead Yet podcast. This is episode 7. Really excited for today. Today's guest is Alexis Royal. She's an outreach specialist. She's also a mother, and she's coming up on 11 years of sobriety in June. So we're super pumped to have her here today. She's our first female guest. Feels like a really important thing for us to bring females into this environment, and addiction or any of the things we've previously talked about in this show, it doesn't just affect men. It affects women. It affects everyone, all people. And so I think it's important that we kind of open up our horizons and have different guests on. So just super pumped to have her here today, and welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here with you.
Yeah, for sure. It's going to be awesome. Just to get things kind of rolling and started, I like to talk to people about kind of where they're from, born and raised kind of thing, and a little bit of their childhood to kind of roll into it. So if we want to get rolling right there, we can do it.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
So I grew up in Austin, born and raised, creature of habit. And this is my hometown. I've lived here my entire life, but it's a good place to land and stay. My mom had a midwife, so I was actually born in the home that I grew up in. So my mom was kind of a free spirit, if you will. I am the woman I am today a lot because of her. She was a first black belt woman in Tukong Musul, which is a Korean art form that they train the military in. And actually there was a huge controversy over Master Yi giving her that black belt because females at the time were not given that status. And she raced motocross. Like, she was just all around, just an awesome, hardcore, free-spirited woman. And she has 100% made me the person I am today. And then my dad, and she worked in politics my whole life, so state and local politics. And so she's very outspoken. And then my dad was a truck driver my whole life. So he was gone a lot. He worked all the time. So I was raised by both of them, but spent the majority of my time with my mom. And I had kind of an unusual upbringing. So my parents divorced when I was 4. They had a really rough divorce, but they taught me the greatest lesson that I could have ever learned, and that is forgiveness, because I really came to a place of forgiveness with each other, and they wanted me and my brother to grow up in what society considers the normal home, right? With 2 parents under one roof. And so they kind of put their differences aside and they divorced, but they lived together till I was 15, which is very strange. People would tell me all the time, like, that is so weird. It didn't feel weird to me. It felt normal. My mom had a boyfriend for 8 years. My dad had a girlfriend for 7 years, and they would all come over to the house and we'd act like we were one big happy family. And I'm so grateful, like, not only to my parents for that lesson, but for, my dad's girlfriend and my mom's boyfriend, because I know that that's such an unusual, dynamic to step into, but to be able to put like your own selfish emotions aside and be able to embrace that dynamic is huge. My childhood, what I remember about it is it being really fun. Like, fun was always at the center of everything. I grew up playing sports. Sports impacted me greatly in my childhood. And I know that we've talked about this before, but I grew up playing tennis. My mom, she really wanted us to have everything in life at truly the expense of herself and her finances, to be honest with you. She put us in private school for kindergarten through 3rd. She put us in tennis after school. She wanted us to have all these, to experience everything. And I'm so grateful to her for that, because we really did have such a great childhood. But I do remember, like, always being in, like the finances were always an issue, right?
I want to dive into that, but I want to ask you a question or a perspective on step parenting.
Okay.
So there used to be this song, and it means the world to me, but it goes, I hope I'm at least half the dad that you didn't have to be. And that's what I think of with my stepdad, because he stepped in when I was 10 and became, in my eyes, my hero. Yeah. And so I think it's important, especially in today's world, to talk about how impactful, like if your parents split or people split, how impactful the new boyfriend is, or the new girlfriend that could be the next stepdad, stepmom. I think that's a deeply impactful thing. And I think, when I think about myself, I'm just grateful that that's who God chose to put into my life, because it could have been, whoever. And so it sounds like, from your experience in your childhood, both of your parents and the people that they were with afterwards, like, they were impactful to your life. They were, in a positive way. Yeah. would you say that having that experience in your younger years and like played into your openness to like how life would eventually turn out for you at some point?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think one, it's important to identify, well, at least now as a mother, I know how hard it is to show up as a parent because number one, keeping yourself healthy, keeping your child healthy, financially providing for your child, like it is difficult. And I think growing up, so many kids, I know I did, definitely took that for granted with my parents. I wasn't grateful in the way that I should have been, in the way that I get to be now, having stepped into the role of a mother. But their relationship and their ability to forgive and to put their differences aside and to show up for me and my brother has allowed me to do the same for Asher, my son. Me and his dad have an amazing co-parenting relationship. I mean, part of that is hugely because I am in recovery. I practice the 12 steps, and that has given me such a beautiful foundation to show up as a healthy person in all relationships and friendships and romantic relationships and co-parenting. And because of that and because of my parents, like Brent is Asher's dad, we have a great co-parenting relationship. And that doesn't mean that it's easy,
Right.
but it means that we both get to be accountable for our part, that we get to put our differences aside, and that we get to show up for Asher as two people, as a united front, really, as a united front, that no matter what, like we are here for you, we love you, and we will do whatever we can to raise you right, including putting our differences aside. And I think that's kind of becoming, I feel like before it used to be more of an anomaly, but that is becoming more and more
Common.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because you see, I think especially our generation, we're starting to realize like the impact it has on a child when the parents don't co-parent well, when there is a lot of friction, when they're still battling their battles that in all reality don't matter anymore. I can relate to that in a lot of different ways. And it wasn't until, and actually it's not even true. It's still happening. Like my parents, my dad's no longer here, but like my mom will still say things at times about him, to me. And when you, as a child, when you grow up hearing those, when that's all you hear, it molds you, it shapes you. It kind of creates a persona of a person in your head that may or may not be true. It's based on another person's emotions. And so I think that our generation is starting to realize, hey, if we want what's best for the child, then we've got to be able to set things aside and actually do what's best for the child.
Yeah. And I think that's so important. Like, you do hear that where one parent will talk negatively about the other to the kid, and it's not even intentional. It's the intent is not to harm the child. We're all just people and human and trying to do the best that we can. And sometimes we say things that maybe aren't in the best interest of our children. I mean, I've definitely, at times showed up in my parenting role in ways that I was like, man, I wish I was more patient. Wow, I wish I would have handled that differently. But I think that's so important to, really not put that on our kids. But I think no matter what, even if you do show up as like the perfect parent, it's never going to feel like that.
Right.
You're always going to go back in the Rolodex and think, oh, I should have said this. I could have done that. I could have been more disciplined. I should have followed through with that consequence.
I mean, it's this mindset of, and I think it's common for a lot of people that we're our own worst critic. And I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing, as long as you know how to process that information.
Yep.
Like if I'm going to criticize myself and it's honest and it's true, that's okay. I just need to know what to do with it. I don't need to spiral out on it and become, like I have this thing that I like to say that I write down daily, but like, what's your identity today? Like what you do today is your identity. Like yesterday's gone. It's in the past. If there's things that you need to amend or take care of, then you need to do that. But like every action you take today is your new identity. Yeah. And I think that that's closely tied to what you're saying about being a critic of yourself. But knowing, I think the STEP program, if you will, helps a lot of us know what to do with that information, because you're not going to stop criticizing yourself. No. Right? That's natural.
And to a degree, it's healthy. But once you start slipping into the shame spiral that you're talking about, that's when it becomes detrimental,
right,
and not helpful. But I think, it's like going back to that perfectionism. I have struggled with that my entire life. Like I am so critical of myself, and I might not show it outwardly, but I can be my own worst critic. And I've really learned throughout my almost 11 years of sobriety to give myself some grace. That's like one of the number one things I teach my sponsees and like any women that I work with that I try to help, you know, in their own recovery journey. It's like, please, like, give yourself some grace, you know? But I think this state of perfectionism, at least for me, came from, like we were talking about earlier too, just this identity. My identity was so wrapped up in sports and kind of like a trained monkey. It's like, if I did good, if I won, if I showed up, if I performed, then I would get praise, I would get approval, I would get validation, I would feel worthy of people's love and admiration and affection. And then it almost has wired me to, I have to be the best. I have to be the center of attention. I have to be perfect. And if I'm not, then I'm not worthy of love. I'm not worthy of my own self-respect, you know? And there's two sides to that coin, because sports also gave me so much resiliency. Like if you play, I mean, I know you played football, but when you are an athlete, like, you know, or if you've played sports in general, there's a mindset that you tap into. My mom used to call me the comeback queen in tennis because I would be down and I would tap into that mindset. And when it was go time, like, she knew that was it. Like, I'm going to win this thing, you know? And so that mindset I've been able to tap into in my, you know, addiction, into recovery. And then even in this 11 years, because life is not perfect in recovery by any means. I mean, it's the human experience. And I think people have this perception of once you get sober, you're supposed to live this, like, life's just supposed to be easy and good, and
it's just not.
It's not. I mean, it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful.
But easy, I wouldn't use easy as the word to describe it. And I want to dive into that, but real quick before we get there, I want to talk a little bit about your athletic background. Yeah. I think what I find interesting is, so I played a team sport. You played. I know they have doubles in tennis, but it's primarily a one-person show. So if you make a mistake, to your point, like, it's obvious. If you do great, it's obvious. So, like, win or lose, it's kind of on you. Whereas in a team sport, there's, 10 other people in football to point your finger at, and then, 5 referees or whatever. So, like, there's a lot of people you can blame, or the coach making calls. There's all these different fingers to point. Whereas in tennis, like, once you're kind of out there, it's on you. And do you think that in dance, you also were a dancer, do you think that those selections in sport created this, like, additional, like, layer or level of perfectionism, like, and all eyes on you kind of thing?
I've never really thought about it, but I do think that's a good point. I don't know. Yeah. I could see how it would. I could absolutely see how it would.
Yeah, I was just curious, because it's like I try to put myself in those shoes and imagine that pressure. It would feel like pressure to me to be in those situations.
Yeah. And there was no pressure put on me from my parents or anything. Right. It was all internalized. And I can remember, I feel like so much of it was already within my personality, like, just kind of innate within me. Because I used to think that our personalities were based off our environment, which they are hugely, and how we were raised. But so much of it, I feel like, is kind of innate with, like, who we are when we were born. But yeah, I've always put an immense amount of pressure on myself. I mean, I've also been very stubborn. Like, I can remember in high school, I was playing a game, and I'm going to show how bad of a sportsmanship I have. And I did not agree with the referee's call. So I sat on the bench and refused to play until he changed the call, which he wasn't obviously going to do, and almost forfeited the game. And then right before the forfeit, I went up and played. So I was always stubborn. I was always hard-headed, opinionated. Definitely I take after my mom, but I also had this very loving, joyous nature to me.
And it's funny or ironic that you bring that up, because I see a lot of those things in myself too. And because I was predominantly raised by my mom, and she's a strong, powerful woman. And with that comes a certain energy. And I know that I possess that. And that energy is kind of like, the best way I could explain it, if I could wrap it up in a nutshell, would be, like, as long as you're with me, we're good. But if you want to come against me, like, watch out. Like,
it's on.
Yeah, the switch is going on. And then, but there's also this other side of me that's, like, gentle, loving, caring, compassionate, loaded with feelings. And I think that's also because I was raised predominantly by a woman. And I appreciate that balance. I think that it impacts a lot of different people in different ways. But for me, I feel like it served me well once I learned how to not just understand where they came from, but be able to process, like, what those feelings and emotions are real time. and not react. We talked about that earlier. So I know that it's ironic that you bring that up, but I can certainly see, given, what you shared about your mom, like, it sounds like she was a badass.
She was definitely a badass.
It sounds like she was a badass. So like, I can see where that energy kind of comes from.
She was. And on top of everything she did for me and my brother, I mean, she probably easily put in 50 hours of work a week, if not more. I mean, I would say 50 to 60 easily. And she was just like this beautiful, neurotic mess. I just have these vivid memories of her driving. She was always late. Okay, this is one character trait that I have. I also have and take after my mom. I have the good quality. I also have the bad quality.
Well, time out though.
Notorious. I was early today.
You were early today.
I was.
So I'm going to give you a shout out. You were early.
Okay, so that is probably because my meeting in Hutto got canceled.
Okay.
So, if it didn't, I would have been probably late.
Yeah, just take the W.
Okay, I'll take the W. But my best friends are probably laughing right now.
Yeah.
They're like, there's no way. She's always notoriously late. But I just have these vivid memories of my mom, and this is like back when pantyhose were a thing. Like,
okay.
Nobody wears pantyhose anymore.
Yeah.
But she would be weaving in and out of traffic on Mopac. We were probably running 45 minutes late because she couldn't find her keys or her purse. That was a daily occurrence. And she, sorry, Mom, totally gonna throw you into the bus right now. But she would fly over to the exit lane and then cut back in front of traffic while she was putting on her pantyhose, doing her mascara in the mirror, digging through her purse, and probably like slapping me and my brother because we're fighting in the background,
right.
Just everything at once all the time. Very, very fun and chaotic.
Yeah. And I think that's a good way to describe, like, there's so many different adjectives I could use to describe my childhood, but there's certain things that I'm more comfortable in. Chaos is one of them.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And sometimes that's good, sometimes not so good. But I think this is a good point to kind of transition into, like, how you got started in your story with your addiction. Like, kind of, around what age, your first exposure to different things.
I'm actually so glad that you said that, because we live in a society that is, a generation that's very adventurous. And something that my pastor said at church is that sometimes we get adventure confused with restlessness. And so it's not necessarily adventure. It's just we're discontent and restless where we're at. So we're always constantly trying to change the way that we feel. And I feel that was very true for my childhood. And like I said, like my parents did their best. I remember my 8th grade year, I was in 6 sports. That is a lot for a kid. Like, I didn't have free time. I mean, from the moment I woke up, it's sports before, dance before school, then it's 2 sports after school, and then it's homework, and then it's bed, and then it's do it all over again. And that was pretty much my entire childhood. And so even now as an adult, like, I have such a difficult time sitting down and watching a movie without getting up 10,000 times because I got to do this, I got to do that. I'm just very restless, and having to learn how to sit still has probably been one of the biggest challenges for me, because I also find validation and self-worth in doing things, if that makes sense.
100%.
So, and it ties into the first time I drank, because my 2 best friends from so it was me, Caitlin, and Brittany, and my 2 best friends, they did extracurricular, but they weren't as bogged down with their schedule as I was. They maybe did one or 2 things. And I remember them having free time to, like, hang out after school, or they just had this kind of open space in their schedule to just live life and be present and do whatever they want. And I remember noticing that for the first time my 8th grade year and thinking that I wish I had that, because I've been playing sports since I was 7. When I was 12, I went to the Junior Olympics for tennis in Atlanta, Georgia, got second in the nation in singles and doubles, which that second place really still bothers me today. And so I always just was so focused on all this other stuff. I didn't really have time to just know. I didn't know how to be present. I didn't know how to be still. And so I remember noticing that. And then me and Caitlin one time found a recipe online. I don't even know how it happened. I don't know if it was her that said it or if it was me, but we like snuck into her mom's liquor cabinet when she was gone. And we made some disgusting coconut rum mixed drink. And we were so young at the time. We found a recipe online, wrote it all down, and then, like dummies, left it on the counter and got busted. But I remember the first time I drank, it was that feeling of, holy smokes, this is like what true freedom is. Like, I wasn't thinking about having to perform. I wasn't thinking about having to be perfect. I wasn't thinking about having to show up. I was just being in the moment. And we were hanging out with these two boys, and we ran 2 miles barefoot in the rain from her house to their house. And I just remember feeling this overwhelming sense of freedom and serenity, just peace inside of myself that I haven't felt, like that pressure that I had put on myself since, I don't even know, as far as I can remember, it was gone. And I just was like, I want to always feel that way, you know?
Yeah, I'm so grateful that you shared it, like that part of your story, because it's so relatable. Like that, you know, for me, whether it was my first drink or my first prescription drug or my first street drug, that feeling is closely associated with that experience of like, I felt like I could put my bags down.
Yeah.
You know, I feel like I could, and that's like metaphorically speaking for like not carrying around all this weight for a few minutes. And I remember just like that feeling to me was like in a very similar fashion. It's like, I want to feel like this all the time. And that was the only thing in my life, you know, I had my first drink at 13, but that was the only thing in my life that had ever given me that experience. And it was like Christmas morning. It'd be like it was Christmas morning. I got the exact gift I wanted. My whole family would be in one room, like all these different things that were never going to happen. Right. And, you know, gifts aside, but like family and being in one room.
Yeah.
Highly dysfunctional family. Sorry, Mom. Shout out to my entire family. Thank you for everything. But like, I love you guys. But yeah, I think that you sharing that experience is important for people, because I think a lot of people still feel alone in that, like coming out and saying like, hey, it felt good. Like, it's okay. It's okay that it felt good. And I think that that's pretty common amongst many of us.
I would argue that's true for every person who struggles with addiction. That feeling of complete serenity.
Yeah.
When you take that first drink or drug.
Yeah. You want it.
Oh, I wanted it. Yeah. And I already had this like adventurous spirit. I wanted to try and do everything. So then I was just like, I just want to try new drugs now.
Yeah.
You know, and so then I tried to smoke pot out of an apple. It was all seeds and stems. We were so ripped off.
Yeah.
I want my money back. I know who you are. And that was kind of the beginning of it. And I didn't do anything else my 8th grade year. So I was like, 14 at the time. And then when I was 15, the second half of my freshman year is when I started drinking a little bit more, and it just started spiraling. And my mom used to tell me this all the time, because alcoholism and mental health issues run very deep on my mom's side, and I'll get a little bit more into that. But lots of suicide, lots of bipolar, psychosis, schizophrenia. Anyways, it's rampant on her side of the family. And so I just started drinking more, and she used to tell me, because she saw me one of the first couple times I drank. She picked me up from a party. It was the second time I drank. I went to a party, and I literally took 10 shots of vodka, because after those first 2, I got the warm and fuzzy feelings. I liked the way I felt, and it was such a physical knee-jerk reaction to do more. There was no question that I was gonna stop. Like, I wasn't gonna stop. My body didn't react that way. My mind didn't react that way. And so I took 10 shots, and she picked me up in her gold minivan. I was like throwing up all over the place, throwing up in the bathtub. Mom was like, oh, you should have seen yourself last night. You looked terrible. But she told me all the time, because my grandpa was a raging alcoholic. And she's told me, she's like, you drink like my dad. You know, that's not a good thing. And so I think she knew fairly early on there was some red flags there with the way that I drank. And so she kind of kept an eye on it. But it just snowballed and started getting worse and worse. And then I started acting out of character. You know, I was always very well liked in high school. I did dance, I did tennis, I did volleyball for a little bit, and then had to choose between volleyball and dance. I went dance, but my mom got a phone call, and I'd been drinking and fighting at school. And she was like, are you sure you have the right person? Like, it's so out of character for, like, she would never in a million years think that she would get that phone call. But I was a different person when I was drinking. I was not Alexis. It was the addiction. It was a disease. And so I would do things that were out of character. And I was a blackout drinker, so a lot of the stuff I didn't remember. And I was like, and I don't know, I'm 8% Native American, so I don't know if it's just the genetics. But yeah, I would blackout drink very easily. And so she got a call, and I got kicked out of school for 2 weeks, not to go to like this alternative learning center. And my mom was just like, what is happening with my daughter? And then the other huge red flag for her was I was always the kid. I want to get my driver's license. I want to have a job. I want to make my own money. I wanted to go and grow. I wanted to grow up too fast is what I wanted to do. But I wanted to be an adult so bad. I just wanted to have all my own things. And I will say sports did give me the discipline and like I work for what I have. And that does give me a sense of self-worth. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to work. I wanted to make my own money. And I forgot what I was going to say. Sorry.
No, you're good. So to tap back into that though, I want to tap into the blackout drinking. Mm-hmm. Very similar. I wanted to ask you this question. Did you ever have a social experience drinking, like where there was more available and you actively chose not to drink more?
Only when I was trying really hard to control it because I knew I was going to go back home to my mom, or because there's some level of accountability there. And even when that was the case, I mean, 99% of the time I wouldn't, Towards the end of my drinking, and we'll get into that, but towards the end of my drinking, I was managing. But I was managing because what I did is I kind of tapped back into like my childhood. I'd fill my life with so many responsibilities, nursing school, dance team, working full time, going to school full time, that I didn't have time for my addiction to flourish. Mm-hmm. So I would kind of be able to keep it at bay. But the second my dance was over and the second, I was in between semesters and my time opened up, my free time opened up, I mean, I'm snorting cocaine at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday and drinking whiskey.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's just how it was. And that's always been my story. So there's been times at my life where I looked maybe like a normal or hard drinker or social drinker, but that wasn't ever my truth.
Yeah.
I could just manipulate the scenery enough to make it seem that way.
For sure. And I can relate to that on such a deep level. Very similar experience. And if work was super busy for me, I could go all in on that and avoid my, quote unquote addiction. But the second they were like, hey, you guys are good for the weekend, like, or, God forbid you give me a 3-day weekend, then I knew, like, for me, that meant like as soon as I left, it was on. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't going to shut it off. And a lot of times I didn't even make it back for that first day of work or whatever that first thing was. I'd have to like come to my senses and be like, oh man, I'm going to ruin everything I've ever worked for. And so I think that there's a lot of conversations around alcoholism and what an alcoholic looks like. I've been asked that question so many times, and I don't have a perfect answer for it. And I'm not sure there is one. And because people ask me, they're like, well, if you were on a daily drinker trip, how do you consider yourself an alcoholic? And I was like, well, for me, I felt like it was something I could not stop. Like as soon as I started, I could not stop. And it would take it took the same willpower I use today to do endurance events is what it took for me to stop long enough to get back into my work routine. And it was like that cycle was destructive to me, and it was on repeat.
Well, I think that's such a misconception is people think that an alcoholic has to drink from the time they wake up to the time they go to sleep, and it has to be a daily occurrence, and that's not the case. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've treated as a detox nurse patients that are binge drinkers where they won't drink for 6 months because they know the second they put alcohol in their body, they're not stopping.
Right.
And then they drink a handle of vodka in 2 days after being dry for 6 months. Like that is the definition of alcoholism, mm-hmm. And I think what people don't understand too is like when we say it's a disease, it's because it truly is a disease. Like it is in the medical books. Our brains react differently. We even have different enzymes that process alcohol. And so what happens in the brain is the reward system lights up like 10 times stronger than a normal person. So let's say you go out and you're sick the next day. A normal person would be able to rationalize and say, I'm sick. I don't feel well. I don't want to do that again the following day. As where me and other alcoholics might have had those same consequences, but because our reward system and our midbrain, which is our primitive brain, has lit up 10 times stronger than the other person's, I can't rationally overcome that instinct almost, if you will, to use. Mm-hmm. And so that's why it's so hard to, that's one of the reasons why you're clean and sober and you know that there's going to be consequences for your drinking. And you can go to the party saying, there's no way I'm going to drink. And then 2 seconds later, you pick up for some trivial excuse.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And I think that it took, and we can get into this deeper too as we get into the sobriety or recovery story, but I think having the science behind it helps. right? Like I've never heard it explained that well, right? Like I don't know anything about the midbrain, and that's the primitive part of the brain, but like hearing it from someone who's educated and as intellectual as you are, like that's helpful for me. And I think that's helpful for a lot of people. And I think that's kind of the point of the show, is to bring different skill sets, mindsets, all these different things, because not one of us have all the answers. But what you just said right there might really click with somebody, where it's like, oh, that's how I feel. And I think that those small connections turn into like really great success stories. So I appreciate you being able to kind of describe that.
Well, that is literally being able to, because people say this all the time, and it's true though, because you think it's a willpower thing. And you live in so much shame because you can't control it. And like I've been able to control, I went to the Junior Olympics when I was 12. I've been able to control all these things in my life and have all these insane disciplines. But this is the one thing, I don't care how disciplined I am around, I can't do it,
right.
And so you live in this state of shame and guilt around it. But recognizing it as truly a disease, it was allowed me to move forward in doing something about it.
Yeah, I think that actually helps a lot of people. Yeah. I know that I don't believe that I could have gotten sober off just strictly willpower, right? And we can get into sobriety and recovery in a minute, but willpower only takes you so far. And in a very similar fashion, it was so hard for me to accept for so long that I could not control this thing, because anything else I wanted to do in life was at my fingertips. If I wanted to be the best superintendent in the construction game, that was at my fingertips. All I had to do was work harder, right? If I wanted to buy a new vehicle, like that was at my fingertips. All I had to do was work harder, or like focus harder. And you can't work your way like that out of an addiction.
You can't.
And man, I didn't want to accept that. I was like, I can do anything, but I couldn't do that. And I think that's for me, that was such an important part of my journey was, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, but that's where like the ego piece came in for me, and like killing that and saying like, hey, it doesn't make you less of a person or less of a man just because you can't control this one thing. And that was hard for me it took me so long to get to a place where I could say that. So you start drinking in high school though. You're blackout drinker. Take me from like 18 to, so you would have gotten sober mid-20s?
I got sober at 24.
Okay. Early mid-20s. So take me from 18 to 24, if you will.
So after the getting in trouble at school, the other red flag for my family was, because I was so excited I couldn't wait to work. I got a job as a hostess, and I showed up to my first day on the job in just blackout drunk. I had skipped school and did a bunch of shots and then showed up to work, and I don't even remember showing up. But my mom was like, that's when I knew there was a problem, because you were so excited for that first day, but you could not control it to even show up. And so there was lots of other things that happened in high school, but essentially my mom at some point was like, we have to do something about it. And so I went to an outpatient treatment facility in high school, and that was kind of, and there are some people that get sober in high school, and I just think they are absolutely remarkable. People that got sober at like 13, 14. I think I talked to somebody the other day that got sober at 12, and I'm just like, it blows my mind.
Yeah. So on that note, I was at my high school last week, and this girl walked up to me after I got done speaking and pulled out her phone, and she had the same day counter that's on my phone, the same app. And she's like, I have 34 days.
That is so cool.
And I remember looking at her and being like, oh my God, I wish I could have figured it out at your age. Like, that's incredible to have that awareness at that age. So I just wanted to, I wanted to tag into that, because like, I agree with you. I admire them on such an insane level that they're willing to take that step at that age.
Yeah, because I definitely wasn't.
Me neither. Yeah. No way.
No, I was not serious about getting sober. I went for my parents and my family, and because they wanted me to go, but I wasn't serious about I couldn't even envision being sober for a day. I mean, I had a fake ID, and I was at this point drinking. I was going to the gas station and getting beers for the next day, and drinking beers from the time I woke up, and sneaking wine bottles into school and drinking all day, and to literally decrease my tremors. So I was like a full-blown alcoholic, but I didn't want to get sober at that time. But it did plant the seed that there is a solution, and that was really important, because before that moment, I didn't know that there was a solution. I just knew that I didn't feel good when I was sober or in my own skin, and alcohol and drugs relieved that for me. And I was going to do that every day, because that's what made me feel okay.
Yeah.
So then let's out of high school, like I said, couldn't wait to move out of my parents' house, couldn't wait to do my own thing, moved out, got an apartment off Jollyville. I think it was like $700 for a 2-bedroom, 2-bath.
Wow.
It was so nice.
Yeah.
It's not a thing anymore. You can't find a 1-bedroom for less than $1,200. But moved in with my best friend, started working on 6th Street it was called Daddy's.
Nice.
It wasn't like a Hooters or anything, but it was just like a hole in the wall burger joint that people would come and slam burgers when they were drunk and drink beer. That was pretty much it. But then, of course, my alcoholism continued and increased because, I just had an endless supply of alcohol.
It's at your fingertips.
Yeah, and no accountability because I'm not doing my own thing. I'm going home, I'm drinking and driving. And when I was 18, I ended up getting a DWI. So and thank God the police were there because I definitely could have killed somebody, but I turned into the police blockade on 6th Street, going the wrong way. And so, of course, they pulled me over.
Yeah.
I get arrested. I go to jail. My lawyer was like, I can't defend you. This is a terrible tape. I do the field sobriety test. I fail miserably. And so that was kind of my first, there was obviously already consequences, but my first legal consequence. And then between the time I got my DWI, and at this point I'm hanging out with this group and we're all probably half of us are in the service industry. We're just drinking and partying and living our life. Nothing too crazy, nothing too out of the realm for like 18, 19, early 20-year-olds. Well, they were actually a little bit older. I would say they were in their mid-20s, late 20s. But we would drink and party and maybe do some cocaine and ecstasy on the weekends, but nothing too wild. One of the people in our friend group found meth. And when I say it spread like wildfire within our friend group, like it was like somebody lit a match and threw it in some gasoline and it was like poof. And it spread from one person to the next, to the next, to the next. And before you know it, people are losing houses, they're losing jobs, they're stealing from each other, just doing the shadiest things. And there was one night I was drunk and one of the guys had it and I wanted to do it. He's like, no, I don't. And I was like, give it to me. And I tried it and it didn't do anything the first time I tried it. And like a true addict, I was like, well, maybe if I try it again, I'll feel something. And I don't know what it was about that second time I did it, but I was hooked like I have never been hooked on anything. And it wasn't even, I can't even say it was like a feeling of euphoria like it was when I drank the first time. It was just almost like a state of OCD, like compulsion. I needed it. I wanted more. And I managed for a very short period. There is very rarely such thing as a functioning meth addict. I don't think I've seen one. If I have, it is a dime a dozen. It is one in a million, you know? But that, like, I truly believe like meth is a portal to hell.
Yeah.
It's such a dark drug and it turns you into like this monster that you never knew that you could be. And you will do anything and everything to get it, and I couldn't hold a job. So I kept jumping from one job to the next because I was showing up like an hour and 2 hours late to my shifts.
Yeah, not 15 minutes.
Yeah, not even 15 minutes, like 2 hours late to my shift or not showing up at all. I got fired from Pluckers.
Oh, man.
I know. That's when you know you're at the bottom.
Yeah.
Wait, I feel bad.
Yeah,
Right.
I love Pluckers. Yeah, that's how I feel about it.
Well, and I love Pluckers too. They have
I'll still
fried
go there
macaroni,
today. Yeah.
fried Twinkies. Are you kidding me? It's the best. So nothing bad to say about Pluckers. But I did get fired from Pluckers because I was so paranoid and I'd been up for so many days. I convinced myself that this table of guys were undercover cops. And there was this car that looked like an undercover car by my car. And so I went and talked to them in like code because I wanted to let them know that I knew what was happening and what they were up to. And then I was just showing up late and they were like, okay, we like you, but you got to go.
Yeah.
It's like, this isn't going to work out. So at this point, I can't hold a job. I'm starting to just now, because there's usually a time period between, at least for me, I don't know how it is now, because luckily I've been able to not get in trouble legally for anything in a long time. But there was about a year or so between when I got my DWI to when I had to start showing up to probation. And within that year is when I found meth. So I can't hold a job. I'm couch surfing. I'm just completely disconnected from myself. And I was up late one night. I had been up for actually days. And one of the guys I was using with was like, oh, just be honest with your probation officer. They love honesty, which is a terrible idea.
Yeah.
Because when she asked me if I'm going to show up dirty for anything, I just told her, I was like, yeah, meth and cocaine, and just start like naming all the drugs, which is not a good idea. Just take my advice on that one. But she's actually said, I'm not going to drug test you. And she sent me home. And then, long story short, she ended up showing up to the house that I was staying at and this is like a week later, and saying, hey, you need to come with me to the office. We're going to drug test you. And I obviously tested dirty for everything. And then I get an automatic recording saying I need to show up to court on Monday. And I go to court, and my mom's with me and my brother's with me. I'm a brother and sister, by the way. I didn't even mention that. My brother's 2 years younger. My sister's 6 years older. But my brother was with me at the court hearing. And at this point, my family has been, and like I really, being in recovery for so long, I've been on the other side of it now for a while and man, like my family went through so much with me. One of the things that has always stuck with me when I made my amends to my brother was that, he really told me, he basically showed me how I stole a lot of his childhood from him. A lot of his high school years where he was kind of unseen because they were so focused on like keeping me alive and healthy that he was almost forgotten. And it like breaks my heart, but I never knew that until he told me. And that's like one of the beautiful things about this process is getting to be accountable for the things that you did and stealing that moment from my brother. But like also now it's my job, or not my job, but it's something that I want to do, is like shine a light on him. Like he's just like, it is, I'm a good person, but I really have to work at it. Like he is so naturally a good human. Like it becomes so natural to him. I don't know. I'm just not like that. Yeah. So I ended up getting arrested in court and doing a month in jail. Mm-hmm. And the judge basically said, we will release you. Okay, go back a little bit. This is like the grips of addiction, where I could have sat in jail for 3 months and gotten out and not have to do probation, and all my charges would be dropped. So in my head, I'm like, yeah, I'm just going to do that because I just want to go back and I want to use meth. And my focus was not on getting better. It was on how can I get out to go do my drug again.
Yeah, no, you're good. So it was 30 days. There was 2 options. Is that right? There was a 90-day and a 30-day?
Yeah, there's a 90-day and a 30-day.
Okay. 90 days, though, is like, hey, you do 90 days, you go home, charges are dropped. Like, this is not in your record. Like, pretty much an opportunity for a fresh start, kind of?
I don't know if it was a fresh start or not on my record, but I just know that I wouldn't be on probation, because the thing with probation is you're going to get, for me, I was, randomized drug testing. And so there was going to be I think I was on probation for a year. Mm-hmm. So that would have been a whole year that I wouldn't be able to use. People use all the time on probation.
Right.
You know what I mean? In my mind. So I'm like, I'll do my 90 days and I'll get out and then I can start using again, instead of doing my 30 days and being on probation for a year and having all the,
right.
all this accountability to not be able to use my drug of choice. But, after being in jail for a little bit, I was like, maybe I'll just do my 30 days.
Yeah. So 30 days, you get out, mm-hmm. right back at it?
No, actually, so I get out. I get released to my mom's custody, and my mom was searching for, because I grew up very lower middle class, and they didn't have the finances to send me to treatment. But my mom found a grant for a state-funded treatment facility in Dallas that was specific to meth addicts. So per the court orders, I was sent to Dallas for a year to go to residential treatment, PHP, IOP, to live in sober living. So I went to Dallas for a year.
And for the viewer and the listener, PHP
is partial hospitalization. So think about it as a step-down process. Like detox is the highest level of care. Mm-hmm. And then there's residential. And then PHP. So for example, where I work, PHP, you live in a house off campus, and then you come on campus to program Monday through Friday for 8 hours a day and then half a day on Saturday. But you slowly start integrating back into society. So you start getting, where you might not have a computer and a phone in residential, you'll get your computer and phone back during certain hours. So it's a step-down process where you can still practice the disciplines and have the support system around you, but you're getting responsibilities back.
Mm-hmm. And then IOP?
Intensive outpatient.
Okay.
So
yeah, I wanted you to say it because I think that a lot of people we talk about these things a lot with a lot of different people, but I think maybe the viewer, the listener, they might be like, wait a second, what's PHP or IOP? So that's why I asked. So go to Dallas. It's a 1-year thing.
So I go to Dallas, and I'll kind of fast forward through this, but I go to Dallas. I stay sober, but I still wasn't doing it because I wanted to. I knew I didn't want to go back to meth. At that point, the damage that meth did to me physically, I had lost 25, 30 pounds. And I'm small framed already, so I looked very sick. And I was a picker, so I had scabs all over my face. I had scabs on my arms, and I had what's called hypnopompic hallucinations for a year after I quit. And so what that is you have hallucinations when you're going into REM sleep and when you're coming out of REM sleep. So anytime I went to bed or tried to take a nap during the day, it feels like the best way I could describe it is sleep paralysis, where you can see yourself trying to sleep. You can see yourself in the room as if it's in live action, but you can't wake yourself up. It's a terrifying feeling. And I had those for a year after I quit using it. So when after my year in Dallas, I came back to Austin, and I relapsed pretty quickly when I came back. I never went back to meth, and I thank God every day for that, because it's such a damaging drug emotionally, spiritually, and physically. But I did kind of go back to what we were talking about. I was functioning to a degree. So I was working full time. I was going to school, but I was using on the weekends. Friday rolls around, and I immediately am drinking. And then I'm doing cocaine Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and sometimes not making it to work on Monday, or sometimes I am making it to work on Monday. But regardless, I'm depressed Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, because I've used up all my dopamine and my serotonin and all my good, chemicals in my brain that make me feel somewhat okay. And so I'm just depressed the entire week. The only day I would be happy during the week would be Thursday, because I was excited for Friday to come, because I was going to start drinking and using again, and even though I don't feel like, when I was in Dallas, it was beautiful because I did have that year sober, but I didn't reap the benefits or the promises of the program, because I wasn't truly working a program. I was just almost dry.
Yeah. I think this is a good thing to talk about, actually. I had an old timer early on in my sobriety explain it to me like this. And we were talking about working a program versus being sober or dry. But what he said to me was, like, if you think of, sobriety as an entire sheet of paper, the drink and the drug is just the top corner. So when you stop that, you just rip the corner off the paper. The rest of the page is sobriety. You have to work the rest of the page, or else, this piece is going to come back. And that always stuck with me. It's like, okay, it's one thing to be dry. And I can relate to what you're saying. I've definitely done it with hopes or thoughts that I was going to return to it. Right. That was always on my mind. Like, I'm going to get back to it. I'll figure it out once I work through this, or I'll switch to this, and I'll only drink this. And I tried everything. And I had to get to that point of, like, there is no other option. Yeah. I'm going to have to not just stop drinking and doing drugs, which is terrifying for a lot of reasons. But one of them you brought up, it's the best I'd ever felt. It's also the worst I'd ever felt. And I'm like, I have to give that up. I have to let go of the thing that gave me those warm and fuzzies you're talking about, like made me feel love. I don't know. It's like that's what I knew love to be. The way that I felt when I was drinking or doing drugs, and the way that I could interact with people, seemed like I got more attention. I was able to provide certain things. Like, all of that made me feel loved and wanted. And I was terrified of losing that. So, but back to what you're saying on, I think that the viewer listener who hasn't been in sobriety or in recovery, they might hear, like, well, because people say, why do people relapse? How do they get 3 months and then relapse, and then 6 months and relapse, and 10 years and relapse? It happens. And I think there's a multitude of reasons behind that. But one of them that I really believe to be true is that if you're not working, your program, your thing, I think if you're just dry, it's going to catch up. Yeah. So there has to be something in there.
And that's true for every human, because we all have our vices, whether it's drugs and alcohol or pornography or gambling or shopping. We all have our ways of social media, like endless scrolling. Like, we all have our ways in which we try to escape the way that we feel. And for the addict, that's how they do it. There's definitely a lot of other co-occurring addictions that happen with addicts.
Yeah.
But that is like their one source that they know will immediately change the way that they feel, because the human experience is to feel restless, irritable, and discontent. That's not just for the addict. It's to have anxiety, to have depression at times, like maybe not a diagnosis, but we have a range of emotions that we feel. And when we feel discomfort, a lot of times we try to change that immediately, you know? And so I think that's why people relapse is they don't have a way to cope with when times get hard or when things get uncomfortable, and they're just looking to immediately change the way that they feel.
Yeah. I'm closely connected to that. And I still, even working what I work, like there are times where at least I have the awareness now to know, like, oh no, I'm seeking something here that's unhealthy. Like this isn't good. This isn't what I need to be doing. I need to sit with this. You were talking about the restlessness earlier. That happens to me too. And it honestly strikes at the worst possible times. Like there's no one around, right? My dog's asleep. He doesn't want to engage with me. And then I'll get struck with this restlessness and it's like, okay, I need to do this, or this will make me feel better. I'll chase, whatever it is. And I'll have to catch myself and be like, no, like, why are you feeling that way? Like, what's triggering this? What's underneath all of this? But I didn't have those tools early in sobriety. Like they were developed over the course of time. And I think that, I think that's also an important piece to talk about in sobriety and recovery too, is, and you kind of hit the nail on the head earlier with this. Day one for me, like getting sober, I had nothing figured out. I was terrified. I was a shell of myself. Like I didn't feel safe in my own skin. I didn't feel safe around anyone else. And so this thought of like, you just get sober, you'll be great. It doesn't happen in the blink of an eye. It is a process. And that process, truthfully, for me, I can speak for myself, hasn't ended. And I can also speak for myself in saying, like, I don't see an end in sight for that process to stop, because if I'm being real, the second I stop that process, I probably could return to some things that aren't good for me. And people say, well, are you living in fear? And maybe a little bit.
I think we all do.
I'm scared to go back to that.
Say that you don't live in fear to a degree.
Yeah, I don't want to go back to that. That terrifies me.
That's where spirituality comes in.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm glad you hit on that earlier, and I think that it's good to hear from another person with a similar story that it's not day one, everything's better, life stops hitting you in the face. It still hits you in the face. And you have to be able to deal and cope with these things in a way that doesn't create relapse. And I think community is a big piece of that.
Huge piece.
And
Huge piece.
I definitely want to dive into community, but before we do, and I don't want to spend too much time talking about your time actually using. I think we've kind of like uncovered that enough. I think that there's a lot of connection that'll be derived from that, but I think there's going to be so much more connection and hope provided from like your story from day one. Hello and welcome to the Ain't Dead Yet podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Dash Hydrate. Dash Hydrate is a premium hydration supplement. I use it personally. I have friends that use it. I know people within the construction industry that use it. I know weekend warriors that use it. It's a wonderful product. It helps with rapid hydration. It's effective. I believe in not just the product, but the people behind the product. Go on to www.dashhydrate.com and make sure you use code Ain't Dead Yet to get you 10% off. Let's go. Enjoy the episode. So I'm really excited to hear it. I've never heard the story in detail.
Of how I got sober?
Yep. And like what was day one for Alexis?
So I actually, and given that a lot of times my process doesn't necessarily work for everyone, and I wouldn't suggest getting sober this way, but I met a guy in AA who happens to be my son's father. And at the time I wasn't sober. He was 2 years sober. I was not sober. And the first 3 months of our relationship, but like I said, I was kind of able to play the cards in a way that it seemed to him that maybe I was normal, that I could control my using until, like I said, dance went away. And one thing, I want to touch on is dance for me. The first time I fell in love at 15, I never didn't have a boyfriend after that.
Okay.
Like I was so codependent. I went from one relationship to the next relationship. A week later, I'm in the next relationship. Like I truly did not love myself or know how to be by myself. And my friend group was always whoever I was dating, their friend group. And I didn't know how to have true, honest friendships with women. And dance for me was the first time I had that in my life. And even though I wasn't sober that first season, it taught me how to have friendships with women, and it taught me what it meant to have a community of women around me that could support me and love me. And that has been a constant theme throughout my sobriety. Like, I have the most amazing friendships today. But go back to when Brent and I started dating. One night, it just, things got out of control. I was showing up at 5 a.m. I was being dishonest. Just the character traits that happen whenever I'm using were there. And he sat me down and was like, I love you, but I got sober to get the chaos out of my life, and you're bringing it back in. And so I can't do this anymore unless you get sober. And I knew I had the not that I had the want, because I feel like people are like, you have to know you want to get sober. Well, no, I know I want to keep using. But I had the willingness to do something different, because I remember so vividly walking past his room. And at this point, he's like strong in his recovery. He's practicing the principles. He's doing his daily disciplines. And he was meditating in his room, and he was sitting there. And what I saw was just like a man that was so at peace with who he was. And I wanted that. Like, I wanted that so bad. I can't remember when I felt that, and I wanted to have that overwhelming sense of serenity and peace and be comfortable with who I am, and to be able to be the peaceful presence that walks into the room instead of an anxious presence that has to be the center of attention, that, that's just like taking and not giving. And so that was I've had external rock bottoms, but this was like the first time I had that real internal rock bottom, where I knew that if I didn't do something different, I was never going to be able to obtain that. I would manage my life, but I was never going to enjoy it to the way that God was wanting me to enjoy it. And so that night when he said that, I said, I am willing to go to, I'm willing to go back to meetings and do what it takes to get sober, but it's not going to be easy, and I'm going to need you in this process. And we were together for 6 years, and we had a beautiful relationship, and we had my son. And but this is the one thing I will say, is that I was still so codependent. I was so codependent in that relationship that I truly do think, and this is why I think they say to not date immediately. I truly do think that if he would have relapsed, I would have relapsed, because I was codependent and I wasn't truly at peace with myself. And it wasn't until him and I split that I set the intention to learn how to be with Alexis. And so I didn't date for almost a year, and I was like, okay, I'm going to learn how to be by myself. And that was the first time I really knew what it was like to have a relationship with God. Because when you don't have a partner there to validate your, when you don't feel worthy, to, tell you like pretty, to tell you that, to tell you all these things you don't feel about yourself, when you don't have that there, and it's just you and it's just God, and you're like, okay, what do I do with this? Like, I remember FaceTiming, my girlfriends, crying, just anxious, saying, when does the anxiety stop? Because I don't know how to be by myself. But setting that intention and following through, I've learned to be by myself, and to put my reliance on God instead of people. Because it's not just relationships. Like, I'll put my reliance on friendships, and anything but God, when I'm not in a good place. And so that was a beautiful realization. And I think that's why they tell you in early sobriety that it's best to be by yourself for a little bit, because you put your reliance on God in a way that you don't when you have people around you.
Oh, I can relate so much there. So I didn't date, let's see, about 9 months. But the first interest I had was someone else that was in the program with me. I think it's super common, and I think everyone warns against it.
Yeah.
But it is super common. And it just wasn't a good fit, right? And I still, like, I love that person. I'm sure they might listen to this, but like, they know who they are, and like, I love that person. They were instrumental in my life, and like, still really important to me. But the first person I, like, quote unquote, fell for in sobriety, I was about 9 months. And that's when I was like, oh my God, I've never dated sober. Been drinking, using from 13. I wasn't dating at 13. So any relationship I'd ever had, like alcohol or drugs, was a massive part of it. And not even for the other person always, just for me. And I remember being like, I have this strong feeling. I'm very into this person, but I can't control these feelings. Like, they're too much, right? Or like, I was triggered so easily on so many things.
Yeah.
And then I would feel so much fear that I was going to lose them, that I would almost do anything to like make it right or fix it or try to be okay. And that's the codependency piece. And I was massively codependent in that relationship, almost probably to the point where I pushed them away at times. and they weren't perfect either, right? But at the end of the day, like I wasn't in a place yet where I could show up in a relationship the way that I would want to. But I didn't know that until I tried it, because I didn't know how I would show up. I had no idea. And I think there's a curiosity thing there for people, especially that start at a young age, that haven't had a relationship sober. You're like, well, what does it feel like? What is it going to be like? And it's easy to connect with someone who has a similar background, right? And it's like, well, this person at least understands a portion of what I went through or who I am. Like, I don't have to explain that to them. I don't have to address this weird thing that's not weird now, but at the time of like, hey, I'm sober. Like, there's a lot of stress around that for people early in recovery. I do want to hit on that real quick though. Sorry. Yeah. This is for the viewer and the listener, and this is the God's honest truth. I have yet to meet someone that I was honest with right off rip about being sober that pulled away from me because of that. I think there's something so beautiful about owning that. And like people can sense your accountability and how genuine you are when you own those things. And if you're in a good place with your sobriety and you own it appropriately, if a person, like most people are going to be like willing to accept that. If they're not, that's okay too though. I want to say that. They're just not for you. And there's nothing wrong with that. But you have to speak your truth. You can't carry that around and then dump it on somebody 3 months in. That's not fair either.
Yeah. What I found to be true about that statement is people who usually have negative opinions about sobriety are ones that are questioning their own drinking.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
You know?
Yeah, there's no doubt there. And that's like a lot of other pieces of life, right? Yeah. When people who bully, that comes from their own place of insecurity. And so the same thing goes with addiction. But either way, so you have this amazing relationship. Like, I'm sure it was challenging. I'm sure it had hard times. And
yeah, absolutely. Well, I think our biggest issue is we're both very avoidant.
Okay.
So like nothing difficult was talked about. So we never fought. It was great. Like, I could probably count on one hand how many times we fought in 6 years. We never fought. But we were both very avoidant, which I didn't recognize until we split and going to therapy and doing work. And why is it that I'm avoidant, and why do I shut down when there's conflict? And but yeah, we still have an amazing relationship. I'm so great. I mean, he saved my life. He took me to a meeting at 10:30, and I've been sober ever since. Like, that's pretty remarkable. And this is where my codependency did benefit me, because when I say his friends became my friends, well, all his friends were in recovery. They all had 2+ years of sobriety. And so I was immediately immersed in a community, which was huge, and a community that was serious about their recovery and working the program in their life. And I think because I had that community, that guidance, I was able to implement and mimic it in my own life, where it gave me a foundation of recovery. But like I said, I was codependent. I think if he would have gone down, I probably would have too. But then after we split, I stayed, by myself for that year. And then about a year later, I always consider Asher's dad, he was like my strong and steady. And then my next love was like my fire, and this was also a guy in the rooms who just so much love for this person. He is just like a magnet. People want to be around him. He's boisterous and joyful and charismatic, and there was a depth to him where we would just sit and talk for hours about God, about goals, about life, in a way that I hadn't had in a relationship, like this emotional connection and vulnerability that, we talked about earlier, that I think it's hard for men to tap into. And I think it's becoming more common that men are able to have these conversations and like experience that for themselves. And I think it's such a beautiful thing. But it was an incredible experience being with him. And it showed me that is something that I was greatly missing in my past relationships that I realize I need. And then after five months of us being together, he was 5 years sober. He relapsed. And so we were together kind of on and off for a year because he couldn't stay sober and he'd go to treatment. And he really tried. I mean, at some points, I definitely feel that he worked a stronger program than I did by a long shot. And so I always wondered, like, why is it that he couldn't stay sober, but I could? And I think part of that is just, well, we all need therapy, but there's certain things that each of us have to work on that maybe certain programs don't treat, and And I don't want to go too much into like his story and his experience because that's his.
Right.
But after a year of us being together, in the second relapse, I said, I love you so much, but if it happens again, like I can't stay with you because I was so consumed with him and my thoughts of him. I was having panic attacks. I was with Asher, but I wasn't with Asher. My mind was elsewhere. And that's when I realized I'm like, this is so consuming that it's taking me away from my relationship with my kid that I can't do it anymore. And so we ended up splitting up. He went to treatment and then he got out and he relapsed and he passed away from an overdose.
Oh my
and
gosh.
That was the hardest experience I've been through in my recovery. Well, there was, and I didn't touch on this. So I told you my mom's family has a lot of mental health and suicide. So my grandpa committed suicide before I was born, and my mom found him. And 2 months into my sobriety, my uncle committed suicide. In 3 months, my cousin committed suicide. So lots of loss on my mom's side of the family, lots of generational trauma that I think each generation tries to get better and better, but we all still carry with us, you know. But yeah, it was a really heavy experience.
Yeah, I can't really say anything in this moment other than like I admire your strength. It's beautiful. Yeah. It's unbelievable. And I know that had to be really difficult to share, and it's probably really difficult to talk about because it's an experience that when you talk about it, you kind of relive it in a lot of ways. And I think that the beautiful part about it, though, is your willingness to go to that place in hopes that somebody out there can connect to it and say like, hey, you know what, this might be really bad right now, but I can get through it. There's a way, there's a path. And I, you know, when I think of like after hearing you share that, and when I think of you now, I see like a pillar of strength for all people in recovery in life, but especially women. And if it's okay with you, I'd like to kind of pivot to that piece of community. Mm-hmm. For you, how important has it been in your journey to build like a relationship with women, right? And like have a circle of women around you, whether that be sober or not. I'm not sure if you have that. I'm quite sure you do, but how important has that been for you?
Oh, for me, it's detrimental to my sobriety. I think community in general is such an important piece of people's lives. And I think we have it, the more technology expands and the more social media presence is just consuming our world, the less community we have because here's what I've realized. Friendships and building community at the beginning can sometimes be awkward and uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. But once you invest in somebody and put time and effort into building that friendship, like it's not always going to be beautiful right off the bat. That's earned, mm-hmm. you know, and then those relationships are incredible. But what happens is we hit this immediate awkward and maybe uncomfortable stage and trying to build this friendship. And then you can just kind of disappear into the realm of social media and escape that way. And you don't really have to invest in people. Right. And I think people don't really have community anymore. But it's been extremely important. After Clyde passed away, and this is 2020, and 2020 was such a difficult year for everybody. But after he passed away, my friendship group, who we had all been sober with for 7-8+ years, 75% of the girls relapsed. Some of them got sober again. Some of them are functioning. Some of them are normal. Mm-hmm. I mean,
whatever that means.
Yeah. I mean, truly, yeah. Where I'm at in my life, like I'm not willing to have that. I don't want to experiment. Yeah, you know?
No,
like,
I'm the same way.
I have my son, and I don't want to experiment. I'm pretty convinced that I might be able to control it for a little while, but there will be some triggering factor in my life that will lead me back to how I used to use.
For sure.
But after all of that happened, after Clyde passed away, after my friendship group fell apart, like I really realized how important community was because I felt so lonely and so isolated, completely sober. And it was like as if we're doing drugs again, just so lonely.
Yeah, and I think that's just helpful to share because I've went through bouts of that feeling, that emotion. Mm-hmm. And usually for me in my story, if I self-isolate, it's like I did that, right? Like no one pushed me away typically. Really, it would be like something I would do to protect myself, or to keep people from seeing like my true colors in that moment, or like to be vulnerable. And for me, the experience with my dad, like I kind of went into that probably for a month and a half of like self-isolation. I was like, all I'm going to do is train. I'm not going to engage with people. I'm just going to work out. I'm going to eat healthy, and just like, I'm going to work on myself. That's what I told myself.
Yeah.
I was doing very little work on myself though, because for me, community is such a big part of that. Like community helps me work on myself. And I think that that's what I would share with anyone who's struggling and looking to get sober. Like, and to your point, it's awkward for most people. I can't say everybody, but for most people, when you first get into that environment and you make friends, like it's not something you've experienced before. It's like the first time you drive a car. It's a little bit weird. You know, you're nervous. You don't know what to do with your hands, and use my left foot or my right foot. Like it's just like any other first experience in your life. But what I've found is like those bonds and connections and relationships that I've built with those people have been some of the most impactful in my life. And I believe God places those people. I really do. And some of the people that I've met weren't even in the rooms. We'd just be like in an airport having a random conversation. And something I'm notorious for is being like, people be like, well, so what do you do? And I'm like, well, I'm sober, and I have like a focus. I want to help people, and I do this thing over here with construction, but like, it's a big part of my story. And it's important, and it's part of me owning it. But you'd be surprised once you open up and say that, how many other people will say like either, hey, me too. There's an instant connection. And it gets to a point where that starts to feel beautiful and not awkward. Mm-hmm. Or they'll say like, hey man, can I get your number? It'd be good to talk to you sometime. I've had that happen. And then 3 months go by and I get a call or a text from this number, and it's like, hey, we met at so-and-so. And I've thought a lot about your story and what you said, and I'm interested in that for myself. That's awesome. Which is beautiful too. Right. But I think God provides those experiences. But I'm in total agreement with you that community isn't everything, but it's close. It's huge.
Because it makes you feel a part of life. It makes you feel connected to others. And I think that's such an important... There's so many puzzle pieces. It's not like what you said, it's not the only thing. A relationship with God, a relationship with self, community, it all has its place. And I think you have to have all of it in order to be... for me, like my best version of myself.
My therapist calls that congruency.
Okay.
And I didn't even know what the word meant when he told me. I'm from Southern Virginia, so we're behind on education at times. But he kept hammering this this concept of congruency into me. And he would like use his hand and he'd be like spiritual, physical, emotional, mental, in sobriety. And he'd be like, when these things are in congruency, you're good. He's like, drop one and the hand doesn't work right. And so like it takes so many pieces. So it's interesting to hear that from you too, that there's like, and it goes back to what that old timer said. It's never a one piece puzzle. It takes all these things to make it work and to make it function.
I think the other piece that I need to tap on too is there have been many moments in my almost 11 years of recovery that I have not worked my program. And part of that was 2020. So when those things happen, when Clyde passed away after I lost my friend group, and I wasn't working a program, and I wasn't showing up as my most healthy self or as my best self in my friendships and relationships, I came so close to relapsing. I mean, you would have thought I was manic. The way I was spending entire paychecks on shopping. I was trying so hard to escape the way that I felt. And I was trying everything but drinking and drugging. I was shopping. I was going on spontaneous vacations. I mean, I bought an expensive car. Like I was desperately trying to change the way that I felt. And I went on a spontaneous trip with my son to Florida. And I remember we went to this nice restaurant. I was like, I'm going to get lobster. And I'm like doing all these things, just not having any type of discipline in my life. I'm just being kind of reckless, if you will, in recovery, completely clean and sober, 8 years into it. And we were sitting at this nice restaurant. There's this couple next to us, and they were drinking a glass of wine, and they just looked like they were just having such a good time. And I was like, I'm on vacation with my son. He's how old he would have been like 4 at the time. He's not going to tell anybody.
Mm-hmm.
I could easily order a glass of wine right now and nobody would know.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole time I'm thinking, you need to step out, you need to call somebody, you need to be accountable. Like, I know these things that I have to do, but I'm not doing them.
Mm-hmm.
And that impulsion's like getting stronger and stronger. And I don't, like, there have been so many, like, by the grace of God moments in my recovery and in my addiction where he saved me from myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I made it out of that restaurant without drinking. And we flew back to Austin. I dropped Asher off at his dad's. I didn't go home. I didn't unpack my bags. I went straight to a meeting. And it was a meeting that they call on people to share. And they called on me to share. And when I'm in a place of like restless, irritable, and discontent, that's the last thing I want to do is be vulnerable in a meeting. But it's the first thing that I need to do. And I shared, and I swear it was like a year or 2 years of like this built up just tension would just washed out of me. And I was like, could have found it in a $2 meeting. Are you kidding me? And I just spent like this much on a car and vacation and all the shopping. And like, I know the solution. And sometimes like, I just choose not to live in it. You know what I mean? But when I choose not to live in it, like God, like I feel it. I just feel it.
I'm also pumped that you brought up what you brought up about like what, even without drugs and alcohol, like what some of the things you do that are unhealthy. Mm-hmm. For me, mine's food. So people ask me, you know, have you ever come close to relapse? And I would be flat out lying if I said like I never thought about it. It's just not the truth. I've certainly thought about it. But in my process, what I've learned is there are certain things that lead to that eventual drink or drug, and it's about being aware of those things and catching it right before I even have that temptation. For me, food is a big one. And so in my drinking and drug use, I couldn't drink or do drugs Monday through Thursday because I had to be accountable at work. So the way that I dealt with my emotional pain was eating. And that's how I gained so much weight.
So true, yeah.
And I gained an unbelievable amount of weight. And it was just like spending or buying to get the next thing to feel better in that moment. And like, it didn't matter what I bought. Like 10 minutes later, it was irrelevant. So it was like, you know, spending in a very similar way, spending all this money or eating all this food to try to fill this void. What I would come to eventually learn in my sobriety is like, if I start engaging in that type of behavior, that's on the path. And so I'm just grateful that I have the awareness now to be like, my eating is getting a little bit out of control. And that can go in both directions for me, under eating and overeating. But when I realize it's out of control or it's not stable, I realize that that's going to lead me to another place of compulsion. I'll start to lose sleep. I won't sleep as good, you know, and then that compounds with being tired, and then tired compounds with being angry, and then anger compounds in me making bad decisions and then being anxious or depressed about them, which leads to shame, which leads to drinks and drugs, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's the road is long, but I can work through it pretty quick to get to that drink or drug. So I think that to your point, and I appreciate you sharing that story about when you guys were in Florida, I've certainly had those thoughts where it's like, I could fly anywhere in the world I want to tomorrow and not tell a soul, and cut loose for a week and not tell a soul, and come back and hop on this podcast. And it never happened. Like,
but you would know.
Right. And I can't live with that.
Yep.
I can't do it. And I think as you go through your journey in sobriety and recovery, to me, if I'm working my program the right way, more accountability gets added to the puzzle. Like with this creates accountability. Mm-hmm. You know, with my dad passing away, that created accountability. I'm not going to let his life go to waste. I'm going to talk about it. And if it saves one life because I talked about my dad overdosing on cocaine, I'm good. I'm at peace with that. And he would be too, or he is, right? Because he gets to see that in action. So, but, you know, to your point, like, don't think that you're abnormal or something weird is going on if you get a compulsion to drink.
Yeah.
It happens. But it's about knowing what to do, to your point.
And doing it.
Because
I can know what to do all day, but whether I take action behind it or not,
you got to take the steps.
Thing, you know?
Yeah.
But I have found, and people ask me, like, how do I have long-term sobriety? I think it's when you do end up at that crossroad, mm-hmm. you do make the right decision.
Yep.
Because it's inevitable, and I guarantee you on my sobriety journey, it's going to happen again, mm-hmm. that I'm going to want to probably drink, that I'm going to be resting on my laurel, as I call it, and I don't do what I need to do in my own recovery to, you know, love myself and be at peace with myself. And I'm going to feel the gravity of that and the mind storm and that crazy narrative we all have in our head that just, tries to take us down. And I'm going to want to drink. But it's like, what do I do in that moment?
Right.
Do I take the next action that's going to enhance my life and put me back in a healthy road? Or am I going to take that drink?
Yeah. For me, in a similar fashion, something that I think saved me more times than I can count is the concept of playing the tape forward. And for the listener or viewer, it's like, not to overcomplicate it, it literally just means like, if I'm contemplating drinking or using, I play the tape forward to when that stops and what those feelings are. And for me, those feelings are much worse than whatever I'm going through right now. Like, that's the bottom for me. That's like me wanting to end my life. And the way that I feel right now doesn't equate to that. Right. And I think that was such a helpful tool for me to add to my toolbox was just being able to play the tape forward. But I also don't close the book on it, right? If that makes sense. Like, people ask me like, will you ever drink again? Like, my answer to that is like, I don't know. Like, I don't have that answer. I'm not going to drink today, and I'm not going to drink tonight, but I'm not going to act like I'm perfect and I got it all figured out, because to me, that's letting the ego back in. And I like to think that my death certificate will say something different than my dad's did. And I'm pretty passionate about that. And I'm pretty hard set in that, because I'm hard-headed and stubborn too. But I'm not willing to sit here and say like, zero chance, no way, absolutely not, right? Because that's me, that's my ego. And one of the biggest things I've learned in this process is like, that had to be put to bed. Like, that had to go somewhere else. So, but yeah, so another question for you,
okay,
if you don't mind.
Yeah, that's good.
What do you think led you to wanting to be not just involved in the community in a like form of like service that's preached, but like as part of your professional like career?
Well, actually, so I've been a nurse for 8-9 years. Mm-hmm. The way I became a detox nurse is the owner of the company I work for now, his name's Michael Dadashi, amazing man. He actually recently did a podcast and I listened to it today and it was incredible. So maybe you should have him on your show next.
Yeah.
But he knew I was a nurse. I'd only been a nurse for a year. I was working at the nursing home. I started off as an LVN. I went back to school, got my RM, went back and got my BSN. I was working as an LVN at a nursing home, and Michael called me, and I knew him from Sobriety and Recovery. And he said, I want nurses that understand my patient demographic, that can be relatable, that can hold a space of empathy and compassion for them, because he was having a hard time finding that in the medical field. There was so much judgment towards addicts and alcoholics, and he didn't want that in his company. So he called me and he was like, I want you to come work for us as a detox nurse. And so I went and worked for him as a detox nurse, and I did for a few years. And then I just needed med surg experience and acute psych experience. So I went and had that experience, and then come full circle, I now work at Infinite Recovery, which is the same facility I worked at as a detox nurse, as an outreach specialist. So my job now is to build and foster relationships with hospital systems, with providers, to educate them on our patient demographic, how we can support them, because there's so much overlap and there's really not a bridge to connect the two. The providers, the more I talk to providers, they have no idea where to send their patients. They don't have resources. They don't know how to give them the support that they need to get better. They're there treating, their liver enzymes are up, they're in cirrhosis, or they have ascites, they have all these complications from their alcoholism. And we can treat that, but if you don't remove the alcohol,
right,
it doesn't matter. Like, it's going to get worse. So that's been really beautiful to kind of step into a different role from a different perspective and really get to come at it with like an education piece and kind of break down those, the prejudiced thoughts that
the stigma. Yeah.
Because it's everywhere. It's not just in hospital systems, but I see it in hospital systems, because so many times our patient demographic are at their rock bottom when they're at their hospitals, and we are a difficult patient demographic to treat when we're not well.
Right, for sure. And so I think that's beautiful, because if I were in that circumstance or situation where I'd been admitted to a hospital and someone comes at me the wrong way, like, I know how I'm going to react, and it's poorly. But if someone comes in the room and says, hey, my name's Alexis, I've got 10 years of sobriety, I'm here to support you. I'm here to help you. My walls are coming down.
Yeah.
Right. And so having that bridge, I think, is such a critical thing. Because I think we're trying as a society. I really do. I just don't think you can do it without the help of people who are recovered, because there's something there that we know and feel and understand and can relate to that you just can't if you haven't been there. And you can read all the books and you can do all the things. And we want people to read more about it and learn more about it. But that piece of it is so difficult. And the only way that I think you can obtain it is to live through it. And it's similar to, you hear law enforcement or, first responders. Like, I have a buddy who's a firefighter back home, and his compassion has shifted so drastically from when we knew each other in college, from like, drug addicts, let them die, to like, man, we're doing everything we can to save them, but I keep seeing the same people. I just keep seeing them and I don't know what to do about it. And they have an outreach program now, similar, where they have a resource, like someone to send them to help them. So I think we're developing in the right direction. And I think that as time goes on, it'll continue to get better. But for me, it's like, how can we make that happen faster?
Yeah.
Because people are dying in the meantime.
Oh, right? Especially with the fentanyl epidemic. It's awful. I mean, I remember seeing this shift as a detox nurse. This is probably about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, where people would come in for heroin addiction and then they would test positive for fentanyl and not realize that they were getting fentanyl.
Right.
And then 6 months later, everybody was coming in for fentanyl because you couldn't find heroin. If you found heroin, it was laced with fentanyl, and fentanyl's cheaper and it gets you higher. And that was everyone, just like 80% of people were coming in for fentanyl knowing that was their drug of choice.
Yeah.
When before it was like, my heroin was laced with fentanyl.
Mm-hmm. And so I learned an interesting statistic last week when I was home. The DEA was actually there. I didn't know they were going to be there, but like I got kind of a kick out of it, right? Like, the old me would have been like, oh my God, it's like, these people are here. They're going to arrest me for sure. But they were there and they shared some super helpful statistics. And one of those was the Roanoke Valley, which is where I'm from in Virginia, is number 2 in the nation for non-fatal overdoses, which is insane. Population of just north of 100,000. So it's bad there. It's rampant. And the reason being, it isn't just like what people are buying as heroin. They're buying fentanyl, to your point, or they're buying pressed pills. And the numbers in Roanoke, Virginia right now that I found crazy, was that 70% of all pressed pills have fentanyl.
Yep.
And I'm sitting here thinking how do I connect this to kids? It's like, how do I get this through their head that like 70%, those aren't good odds. And
It's terrifying.
Yeah. So
as a parent too.
Oh my gosh, I couldn't imagine. So like, I asked the kids when I'm talking to them, like, hey, if I told you if you left here today and you take a certain road, there's a 70% chance you're gonna die, would you take that road? And they're like, no, we're not stupid, right? And I'm like, good. Same principle with pressed pills or buying pills that you don't know what they are or whatever, right? Whole separate conversation of how you can get addicted to your own prescription and get to heroin, but like, or Adderall to meth. Mm-hmm. Like, that's already a risk. But
those pressed pills look so real.
Oh, it's unreal.
Yeah.
It's literally unreal how real they look. Like, you look at them and you can pull it up in a book or on the internet. Like, you can do all your research and be like, hey, is this okay? Is this what it's supposed to look like? And it looks the same.
Yeah. I can't tell you how many people I admitted who thought they were taking Oxycontin.
Mm.
And I was like, you're testing positive for fentanyl. He's like, no, I trust my drug dealer. I'm like, your drug dealer probably doesn't even know what he's getting. And also, don't ever trust your drug dealer.
Yeah. Well, they're not pressing them, most of them.
No.
You know what I mean? They're buying
them. They're the middleman.
For sure. And the other thing is, like, it's in every drug, right? It's not just one anymore. Like, it started, like, you only really heard about it with heroin. Now you hear about it with everything. There was like some high schooler last week who like smoked his first joint.
Wow.
With like his friends, like first joint ever. And like, the crazy thing about fentanyl is like, if something is laced, it doesn't like necessarily mean it's laced across the entire joint, just a part of it, right? And like, he happened to smoke that part, and it killed him.
Wow.
And it's like, so I tried to get across to them, like, and I told him this. I was like, if I was like, if I would have lived the life that I live at your age now, I'd be dead.
Yeah.
So like,
absolutely.
And it still almost took me out. So like, that's what I was trying to get across to him. Like, you should be afraid of this stuff. It should terrify you, and you should stay as far away from it as possible. But that's difficult to tell kids, because I know what it's like to be like, well, I want to try things. I want to experience things. But how do you tell them, like, no, this isn't a path worth walking? Yeah. It's tough.
It is tough, because I know nobody could tell me anything in high school. But I think kids nowadays do is they're truly losing people left and right. You know, I think there was a couple kids in high school that we lost throughout our 4 years to overdose, but it's way more common now, you know? So I think and actually what I've heard is this new generation is, at least in regards to alcohol, is the most sober generation. So they drink less alcohol than people have over the last 100 years, which is pretty cool.
It's a good start.
That's a good start.
Yeah.
That's a W.
Absolutely, because, well, for me, alcohol was my gateway drug.
Yeah.
And I've said this before, but I never smoked a joint and said, well, I'm going to go buy an 8-ball. You know what I mean? It was
never.
It was while drinking every single time. Or the first time I tried meth, I was drinking. I smoked crack in a back alley with a homeless dude in Nashville while I was drinking, right? There was no limit. I just wanted to feel those things. And it was always while drinking. So that's, I think, going to prove to be an impactful statistic that you just shared. If less people are drinking, less people I believe, are less prone to try these other drugs.
Yeah, to have a cross addiction.
Yeah.
Yeah, I never tried cocaine without drinking either.
Yeah, no.
I did do meth without drinking.
Yeah. I mean,
your inhibition, you don't.
Yeah, it's not there. It's not there. And to your point, the alter ego thing, you can't explain it unless you've been there. People would call me TJ. That was my alter ego.
Oh, mine was Lexi.
Okay. Yeah, that just meant
that was my party days.
It's means Tripp's cracked out. He's being TJ right now. And it was hilarious at the time. I'm like, TJ, you know, I think back on now, I'm like, oh my God, why? But, well, I don't, we're running a little low on time, but there's one more thing I really want to ask you.
Okay.
What gets you out of bed today, right? What keeps that fire lit for you? What's the order?
What does my schedule look like, or what?
No, what drives you? What drives you to do all that you do and to lead the way that you lead and to carry yourself with so much strength and vulnerability? What drives you?
This is going to sound so cliche, but it truly is God. And we talked about this book. It's called The Go-Giver. And that really put a lot of things into perspective to me. If you lead with a heart of service. And so I try to lead with the heart of service. So everything is not a task. It is a gift that I get to give to the world with an intention to make the world better or to make myself better. And I think and that mindset does not come naturally to me. I will tell you, I have to wake up every day and meditate and read and pray to God that my thoughts and my vision is in alignment with His and who He wants me to be and how He wants me to show up to the world. And when I do that, I'm able to show up in a way that feels effortless. And of course, my son, I want to be the best version of my son, because your kids will inevitably be who you are,
right,
or who you were. And so if I can show up as a healthy, giving, loving, selfless person, then my hopes and prayers are that Asher can show up as a healthy, selfless, giving person.
Yeah, I love that.
Thanks.
I love that you're willing and open to talk about God. I think that it's been big for me, big for my journey. And we've had other conversations around that specifically. But I'm sitting here thinking, with the time winding down, we're probably going to have to do this again.
Yeah.
Because I feel there's a lot more to talk about, which is awesome. That's how it should be. But I'm filled with gratitude tonight recording this. I think this is going to help so many people. And I want to commend you for coming in and sharing your story so vulnerably. And not a lot of people, and no fault of their own, but not a lot of people can sit in that chair and do that. It takes a lot of work, right? And it takes a really strong person to do that. So thank you.
Well, something that was taught to me day one of my recovery is that you always walk through fear, no matter what.
Yep.
And so that is something that I've always practiced, whether it's public speaking, sharing my story, whatever that looks like. I always say yes, especially when I know I'm going to have anxiety or fear or I'm going to be uncomfortable. I say yes, because that gives me, number one, opportunity to rely on my higher power to work through me. Number two, it gives me an opportunity to walk through fear, and that builds self-confidence and self-esteem and self-worth. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Yep, I totally get it. And it's funny how when you continue to say yes to things, certain things get easier, but then you're presented with more opportunities, I believe, by God, that say like, okay, here's your next, opportunity to walk through faith with me, walk through fear with faith. And similar to like you sharing your story, like mine was last week talking in front of those high schoolers, right? I'm like, what do you say? You know what I mean? I was terrified. You probably couldn't tell it from the outside, but like I could feel it. I felt like I was in shambles, and it's okay to feel that way, right? I think that we talked a little bit about this before, but it's okay to state how you feel and understand that it's very real and it's very present, and then understand like you can continue to move through that. Yeah. So either way, I just, I appreciate you coming on, and we'll definitely do this again.
Yeah, no, I'm so grateful for the opportunity. Thanks for reaching out. And this has been really healing for me. So I really appreciate the conversation, and your having your own insight into wanting to bring more women onto your show. I think that speaks a lot to who you are, and just always wanting to better yourself and better what you do, and just be expansive and experience everything. And so I'm really grateful for you.
Absolutely. Well, we'll wrap it on that. We appreciate you guys tuning in and watching the Ain't Dead Yet podcast. And that'll do it for this episode.